The stars were quiet and cold above the black sky of space, and the ship called Titan moved slowly through the dark void, carrying the last hope of Earth and the last secret of human war. Captain Mara Zhang stood tall on the bridge, her eyes locked on a large screen, showing the enemy fleet, closing in like a wall of metal and death. They had no reason to fear a human ship, not this old slow one, not this forgotten piece of Earth's past floating alone near the edge of the neutral zone. The Galactic Union had sent a warning days ago: surrender or be destroyed, and they had laughed when no answer came from Earth. They thought humans were weak and too new to space, and too simple to matter. But now everything would change. Below the bridge, deep in the belly of the Titan, a strange machine hummed with power, its long rail chamber glowing faint blue from the energy charging inside it. This was not an alien weapon, it was not magic or some lost tech from the ancients. It was human-made, old science with new rage, built from pain and fear and the will to never be conquered again. The first human railgun. Not a beam, not a laser, not something you see coming. It used magnets so strong they could tear metal from across a room, and it launched a metal rod the size of a car at a speed faster than sound, faster than thought. And it never missed. Mara turned to her crew, who were silent with fear and waiting for the order. She spoke only 2 words. Do it. The lights dimmed and the ship shook as the power systems fed everything into the weapon. There was a moment of silence, like the calm before a great storm. Then, the railgun fired. There was no sound in space, only the shaking of the Titan and the lights flickering as the energy burst forward, like a dragon leaving its cage. On the screen, the enemy cruiser, the largest, one the pride of the Varnak fleet, vanished in a flash. It did not explode. It did not break into pieces. It was just gone. The rod had passed through it from front to back, slicing through its shield and hull like paper, and left only drifting metal dust behind. The bridge of the Titan was still. No one spoke. No one moved. The crew looked at the screen as if they had seen a ghost. And in a way they had. Across the stars, the Union fleet froze in place. They had seen it too. Their sensors had recorded everything. A single human ship, a single weapon, a single shot. And one of their best ships no longer existed. Across alien worlds, leaders and generals and warriors watched the same video over and over again, trying to understand, trying to believe. It was not possible, they said. It must be a trick, they said. But the truth was plain and heavy like a rock on the chest. Humans had made something deadly, and now they were not a joke. Now they were something else. Mara stood tall on the bridge, her voice steady as she gave the next order. Target the second ship. She was not going to fire again, not yet, but she wanted them to know she could, and that was enough. The enemy fleet began to move back. No more threats, no more messages, just silence. They were scared. The first human railgun had spoken, and it had not used words. It had used fear. Across Earth, people waited for news, not knowing if they would live or die. Then the message came from Titan. Target destroyed. Enemy retreating. Mission success. The world cheered but also wept because they knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity. In a single moment, with a single shot, the balance of power had shifted. No one could ignore Earth now. Not after what they had seen. The railgun was not just a weapon. It was a warning. A promise. A whisper in the dark that said, "We will not kneel. We will not break. We will fight. And we will win." Captain Mara did not smile. She knew what was coming next. Peace would not last. The Union would send more ships. They would want the weapon. They would want to destroy it, or steal it, or copy it. But they would never forget the first time it fired. The moment the stars held their breath. The moment fear began. The shot that changed everything. Before the stars knew fear, before the Galactic Union went silent, before the name Titan became legend, the world still saw humans as small and simple and broken. They thought Earth was weak because it had fallen behind, because its ships were old and slow, because its colonies were few and scattered, because its people still argued and still hoped and still cried. But there was something the galaxy did not understand about humans. Desperation can build monsters. It started 5 years before the shot was fired 5 long years of losing battles and destroyed stations and vanished outposts. One by one human settlements had gone dark, and the Union sent no warnings, only cold reports that said these places were unstable or unsafe or too far from protection. But humans knew what was really happening. The Varnak fleet had begun to move across the outer rim, and where they went silence followed, and Earth knew it was next. The United Human Council called for help, but no one answered. So they turned inward, and they turned fast. All across Earth and Mars and the moons of Jupiter, people worked in silence, building something old and something new, something never seen in this galaxy before. They called it Project Ironcry. Not a weapon built with alien tech, not a gift from some ancient race, but a weapon of pure force and brutal speed. The first railgun of war. And the ship chosen to carry it was a forgotten ship from an older war, the HSS Titan. Rusty in some places, patched with scrap. In others, it was a graveyard ship made alive again. Captain Mara Zhang was chosen not for her rank, not for her medals, but for something colder and deeper. She had lost her home to the Varnak, she had lost her crew, and she had sworn never to lose again. Her eyes were sharp and calm like ice that never melted, and when she stepped onto the Titan for the first time, the crew knew they were not here to survive. They were here to break the enemy. The railgun was hidden deep inside the Titan, carved into its spine and powered by a reactor that hummed like a sleeping storm. Dr. Lena Voss was the mind behind it, and she never smiled, and she never slept, and she never doubted. She had designed weapons before, but nothing like this. Not because it was smart or pretty or smooth, but because it was the opposite. It was raw and angry and loud. A weapon that did not ask for permission and did not care for rules. She said once, if they will not hear our words, let them feel our silence. And so they waited. The order came one cold morning as Titan drifted near the edge of Sector 8. The Union fleet had entered the zone and sent a message that left no choice. Surrender or burn. And Earth sent one reply. Let them come. Mara stood on the bridge looking at the crew, young and old, fresh and broken, some ready to fight and some just afraid. She spoke to them not like a leader, but like a storm. She told them this was not a suicide, this was not revenge, this was not about glory or medals or history. This was about showing the stars what it meant to be human. It meant pain and rage and hope and stubborn fire. And when the sensors showed the enemy ships entering range, the bridge went quiet. Outside, the Titan floated still and empty like a rock in space, but inside it was alive with heat and will. The railgun chamber charged slowly, pulling power from every line and every light. The ship shook softly like it was breathing. Mara turned to the main screen and saw the enemy cruiser, big and proud and deadly, coming closer without fear. She whispered to herself, not a prayer but a promise. Then she gave the order. The chamber locked and the rod slid into place, a piece of forged metal, nothing more and everything more. It was the last word of Earth, made from the bones of fallen cities and the melted guns of lost soldiers. Lena stood beside the chamber, eyes locked on the numbers as they rose past the red line, past the safety, past the edge of reason. She said, we fire now or never. And the command was given. In that moment the stars blinked and the Titan roared without sound. The railgun fired. The rod flew faster than light, faster than thought. It became a beam of solid death, cutting through space like a knife through water. And the enemy ship was there, and then not there, just gone. No fire, no smoke, no scream, only the silence after the storm. The crew stared and the galaxy changed. But this part was still far away. In the moment before all that, Mara stood in the heart of a machine built from fear and hope. She thought of Earth, of blue skies and green fields and oceans that whispered stories of old. She thought of the people who had sent her here not to win, but to remind the stars that humans are not shadows. They are fire. And that was what the railgun was. Not just a weapon, but a mirror. It showed the galaxy what Earth had become. Not monsters, not heroes, just people who had been pushed too far. And when people like that rise, they do not rise alone. They bring the storm with them. The Titan was the storm, and soon the stars would hear its voice. But first they had to see what humans had built in silence. They had to see what fear looked like in motion. They had to see the shot, That would change everything. And that shot was coming. It had been waiting inside a machine born from pain and love and rage and hope. Waiting inside a crew who knew they might not return. Waiting inside a captain who had lost too much to care about peace. Waiting inside a world that had been mocked and ignored and hurt. And now that shot was ready. And it would speak loud without words. Like thunder without rain. Like fire without smoke. Like the truth without mercy. And the galaxy would listen. Because they had no choice. The railgun was loaded. The charge was full. The target was locked. And the stars held their breath as the enemy flagship vanished into dust, and silence filled every ship and every world that had eyes on the battle. And for the first time, since the war began, the Galactic Union had no words left to say. No one had expected the Titan to survive, not the Varnak, not the Union Council, not even some humans back on Earth who had already prepared memorials and farewell messages and goodbye prayers. But the Titan did not fall. It stood quiet in space, a shadow made of metal and rage, with a railgun still warm and a crew still stunned. On every world with access to the Union networks, the video played again and again, the same few seconds, the moment when the great cruiser known as the Sword of Varnak disappeared without a sound. It had been the pride of their fleet, a ship said to be untouchable, the strongest armor, the best shields, the most advanced targeting systems, and it had lasted less than a second. Alien news channels went blank. Analysts refused to speak. Leaders stared at the screen with cold fear spreading through their bones. Some asked if it was a glitch, others blamed secret alien tech or some hidden trick, but deep down they all knew it was real and it was human. The Union held emergency meetings behind locked doors, panic rising as reports flowed in from across the sectors. Allies asking what to do, enemies hesitating, spies demanding blueprints. No one had answers. In the middle of it all, Earth was silent, not out of pride, but because they too were shocked, because they too had seen something they could barely believe. One shot had done what years of diplomacy and begging had not. It made the galaxy listen. Captain Mara stood at the edge of the bridge, staring at the wreckage, floating outside bits of metal, glowing in the dark like broken stars, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She had not smiled, she had not spoken much since the shot, and neither had the crew, who still watched the screen, as if expecting the enemy to return somehow from the dust. Dr. Lena Voss stood alone on the lower deck, near the railgun, her eyes locked on the cooling chamber, her hands shaking not from fear, but from the weight of what she had done. She had always believed in the weapon. She had called it the voice of Earth, the cry of a wounded world, and now the stars had heard it. Messages began to flood the Titan, encrypted signals, some friendly, some not, some silent, some screaming, each one carrying fear and confusion. The Union offered a ceasefire, a strange thing for a force that had never needed one before. They asked for talks, for peace, for answers. Captain Mara forwarded the messages to Earth and waited. She knew what this meant. She knew what came next. The galaxy was changing and humans had become part of the storm. On alien worlds across far systems, people gathered around screens to watch the moment again. Crowds, silent children, afraid elders, whispering tales of other wars and other monsters, but nothing like this, nothing this fast, this final. The fear was not just about the weapon, it was about what it said, what it meant. It told them that humans had reached a point where they would rather burn the sky than lose again. And that kind of will could not be ignored. Some species began to send gifts, and peace offers small tokens of respect wrapped in caution, hoping to show goodwill before it was too late. Others held war councils in dark rooms, whispering of strikes and sabotage and fast plans to stop Earth before more railguns were built. But none of them moved, not yet, because the image of the cruiser vanishing still played in their minds, and they could not forget it. On Earth the people wept and cheered and held each other in streets and stations and bunkers. They sang songs for the Titan and lit candles for the crew and sent messages of thanks and hope into the void. But they too knew this was not an ending, this was not victory, this was not peace. It was only a warning, a flash before the storm, a breath before the scream. The Titan drifted slowly, now its systems cooling, its power low, its crew resting, with one eye always on the stars. Captain Mara wrote a message to the council, a short one, not full of praise or fire, only the truth. We fired, they ran, we wait. Dr. Voss sent her own message to the science division, not to gloat, but to warn. She said the weapon works too well, it cannot be used again, without a price. But Earth knew the price was already coming. The Union would not stay silent forever, and neither would the stars. Across the black sea of space, rumors began to grow, stories of human ghost stories of railguns being hidden on moons and stations, stories of Earth building more Titans, each one stronger than the last. None of it confirmed, all of it feared. The balance of power was broken not because of size or speed or number, but because of one idea, that a single human ship could erase the strongest enemy in one breath. It changed the rules. And rule changes never come without fire. Some Union commanders resigned, unable to explain what had happened. Some went into hiding. Others began to plan around the new threat, mapping Earth space with red lines and warning signs. Do not engage without cause. Do not approach without scans. Do not forget the name Titan. But names mean little in the face of fear, and fear was growing faster than any fleet. Back on the Titan, the crew began repairs, quiet and careful, eyes always on sensors, hearts always half frozen, not by cold, but by what they had seen and what they had done. They had survived the first strike. They had fired the first shot. Now they were waiting for the aftershock to hit. And it would hit. Not with one ship, not with one shot, but with many, with politics and pressure, with spies and lies, with battles that would not come from the front but from within. Captain Mara knew it. Dr. Voss knew it. The crew felt it. The galaxy had changed because the rules had changed, and when the rules change, everything else breaks. And something was breaking already in the minds of those who once saw humans as weak and soft and slow. Now they saw something else. They saw the shadow of Earth rising across the stars, and they feared what would come next, not because they knew, but because they did not. And that unknown had a name now. The silence after the shot did not last long, because fear moves faster than light, and across the stars panic began to rise like a storm with no sky to hold it. On the planet Durvan, where trade ships from 10 species moved through the great ports daily, the markets froze, and the skies above turned quiet, as every screen showed the same moment over and over. The flash, the silence, and then the nothing where the Varnak cruiser used to be. Children stopped playing, guards left their posts, even the loudest merchants forgot their prices, and watched with wide eyes as the human weapon shattered everything they believed was safe. On the ice world, Beluros, the leaders of the Varnak, sat in the war chamber, with claws twitching and voices low. Their great cruiser, the Sword of Varnak, had been sent with pride and song, and now there was no song, only silence and shame and confusion. They demanded answers from their generals, who could only replay the video and explain that no shield had stopped it, and no armor had slowed it, and no warning had come before the strike. Across the Galactic Union embassies went dark council sessions, stretched into the long hours of night, and fleet commanders held secret meetings with hushed tones and clenched jaws, because one shot had broken the balance of power that held the galaxy together. It was not just a human victory, it was a message, and worse, it was a mystery, because if humans could do this, then what else were they hiding? And if they were not hiding anything, then what kind of minds could build such power from nothing but scraps and silence? On the moon city of Harka, where the Union trained its best spies, a message was decoded and sent across the stars. It read in simple words: Earth must be watched, Earth must be feared. Ships were redirected, trade lanes rerouted, old alliances whispered back into the light, even ancient enemies found common ground in fear of what came next. And yet no one moved against Earth, because movement meant risk, and no one wanted to be the next ship erased by a weapon that made soundless fire. Meanwhile, on Earth, the streets filled with cheers and tears as people looked up at the stars, not with fear, but with pride, because for the first time in generations, they were not begging for peace, they were being asked for it. Captain Mara remained aboard the Titan, silent, and still, her thoughts deeper than space, her eyes always on the screens, as new signals came in from new voices, some known, some never seen before. Some called her a hero, others a threat, some offered peace, some offered nothing but silence. All of them said the same thing without saying it. They were afraid. Dr. Lena Voss continued her work in the shadows of the lower deck, her hands building new things, her mind already far beyond the first railgun, her thoughts like lightning too fast to speak. She wrote messages to Earth not filled with joy or success, but with warnings. She said this was not a weapon, it was a promise, and promises bring debt, and debt always comes with collectors. The Union sent a delegation toward Earth cloaked and quiet, hoping to speak before others, struck, hoping to understand before it was too late. In the dark corners of the galaxy, mercenaries were hired, bounty lists were updated, and black market whispers began to speak of stealing the railgun or finding the next Titan before it fired again. But none of them moved, not yet, because no one wanted to be the one remembered as the next fool to test the fire of Earth. Alien worlds with centuries of peace started building weapons again, digging into old vaults, unlocking things they once swore never to use again, all because a single human shot had shattered their comfort. Panic turned to planning, and planning turned to fear, and fear turned to silence, and silence turned to watching, and watching turned to waiting. And still the Titan waited, silent like a beast sleeping in deep water, too quiet to be calm, too still to be safe. The crew kept busy with quiet hands and quiet voices. They knew what they had done, they knew what came next, and yet they stayed, not because they wanted to fight again, but because they knew they might have to. On a lonely station orbiting a dying star, an old alien historian recorded the moment with shaking hands and whispered to no one that this day would be remembered not as the day Earth won, but as the day the galaxy lost control. And that was the truth beneath all the panic and fear and rage. The galaxy had lost its center, and Earth had taken its place. Not with words, not with alliances, not with diplomacy, but with one shot that broke a legend and built a new one in its place. The panic spread to places Earth had never heard of, to species that had never seen a human before, to empires that thought themselves untouchable, now whispering about a world of dirt and sea and fire that dared to speak in thunder. And still Earth said nothing, and that silence screamed louder than any war cry. The humans had done what no one thought they could. They had changed the rules, and once rules are changed, nothing is safe. In hidden rooms across every major system, blueprints were spread and examined and questioned. How had Earth done this? How had they built a weapon from old science and made it stronger than anything in Union hands? And no answer came, because the truth was not in the weapon but in the will. Earth had not fired the railgun to win a war. They had fired it because there was no other choice left. And when you fight with nothing to lose, you do not care who you scare. You only care that they hear you. And the stars had heard. Now the panic sat heavy like a storm before lightning, everyone watching, everyone guessing, everyone hoping that maybe, just maybe, the humans would not fire again. But deep down they knew. If pushed again, Earth would not whisper, they would roar. And that roar would not be words. It would be fire. It would be silence. It would be the end of the next ship that thought them weak. The panic did not stop, it grew and grew, because fear is a thing that feeds itself, and in every corner of every empire the question echoed again and again. What comes after the first shot? And no one had an answer. The galaxy called it magic, they called it mystery, they called it the weapon of shadows, and whispered that no species so young should have made such fire, but none of them truly knew the truth, and none of them understood the secret behind the railgun. It was not alien, it was not stolen, it was not even new. It was old, so old that the science behind it had lived in human books long before they had reached the stars, before they had colonized Mars, before they had left their skies behind. The railgun was built for magnetism, and metal from force, and speed from equations, and wires not from myths, and not from dark science, and not from gods. It was the will of Earth turned into a machine. And the heart of that machine was Dr. Lena Voss. She had been born during a war, raised in the ruins of a lost city, fed by stories of heroes and fallen walls and broken promises, and when the world grew quiet, she had grown loud. Her mind was not like others. It moved fast, it burned bright, it questioned everything and feared nothing. She did not want power, she did not want medals, she did not even want peace. She wanted a voice, and the railgun was her voice. It began as a sketch on the back of a ration card, then grew into blueprints, then into a model, then into a weapon that could break stars if aimed right. The first tests had failed, melted wires, cracked steel, crushed walls, but every failure only sharpened her mind and deepened her will. She said once to the captain of the Titan that this weapon was not made to kill, it was made to end silence. Because silence is what kills. The silence of unanswered calls, the silence of abandoned colonies, the silence of cries lost in space. And so she built the weapon to speak for those who never got to. Its power came not from unknown energy, but from the way it used known energy with a rage that science books had never imagined. She found ways to strip waste heat, to rechannel burst loads, to stabilize the projectile without touch, to keep the chamber cool, while the rod moved faster than sound. The rod itself was simple, just dense metal shaped like a spike with no warhead, no chemicals, just speed and weight and rage. It flew so fast it turned into fire and passed through ships before they knew they had been hit. But none of this was the real secret. The real secret was the human mind. Because in all the galaxy no one else had built such a thing, because no one else had been desperate enough, mad enough, or stubborn enough to even try. Other species feared damage to balance, feared breaking treaties, feared the cost of mistakes, but humans had already paid those costs and had nothing left to lose. Lena did not build it to win, she built it because no one else would. And the galaxy was afraid not just of the weapon, but of what it meant. It meant humans could take what others threw away and turn it into thunder. It meant humans could bleed and fall and rise again with fire in their hands and truth in their eyes. And the truth was simple. They would not be ignored. On the Titan, a railgun was cleaned and checked and polished, but not used again, not yet, because its very silence spoke louder than noise. Captain Mara would walk by the chamber, sometimes her eyes quiet, her steps slow, and each time she looked at the weapon like it was alive, not as a friend and not as a monster, but as something in between. She knew it was not just steel and circuits, it was the weight of Earth's last breath. Lena kept the design locked in her mind. She had refused to send full blueprints back to Earth. She had refused to write down key parts. She trusted no one with its heart, because she knew that power this strong must never be easy. And deep inside she feared what others would do if they had it, because the weapon was not evil and not good, it was only a mirror. And mirrors show truth. Back on Earth the Council demanded to see the design, demanded to know how it worked, wanted to build more, wanted to show strength. But Lena sent only partial files, small pieces enough to study, not enough to copy, and her message was short and sharp. You do not give matches to those still playing with fire. Some called her selfish, others called her wise, but all of them feared her. Because knowledge held back as power held tight, and she held it with iron fingers. The Union still searched, still sent spies, still listened for whispers in the black, trying to find how it worked, trying to unlock the riddle, trying to steal the secret. But they failed again and again, because what they did not understand was that the secret could not be stolen. It had to be earned. It had to be built from loss, from nights with no stars, from voices crying out and hearing only echoes. The railgun was not made in labs, it was made in broken homes and burned flags and empty skies. It was the sound of a people who had nothing left but the will to be heard. And now the galaxy had heard them, and they could not unhear. Across distant stars where new empires were rising and old ones were fading, the railgun became legend told in hushed voices, sometimes with awe, sometimes with fear, always with truth. Some called it the human starbreaker, others the spear of Earth, others just called it the end. But Lena called it the cry, because that was what it truly was. Not a weapon, not a tool, not even a machine. It was the cry of a wounded world, and the stars had no answer for it. On the Titan, Lena sat near the chamber one evening, her fingers running along the metal, cold and smooth and deadly, and her voice soft like wind across snow. She whispered not to the weapon, but to herself. Let them fear it if they must, but let them understand why it was made. Let them know we never wanted war, but we will not be silenced. And the stars beyond the ship blinked, once more watching, waiting, wondering if the silence would last. Because silence is not peace, and peace never lasts forever. Not when power this deep is hidden behind quiet eyes. Not when the secret is not in the metal, but in the heart of those who wield it. And not when the cry of Earth still echoes across the stars. The stars had gone quiet, but quiet never lasts when fear is mixed with pride, and anger whispers turn to shouts, and warnings turn to plans, and somewhere in the dark corners of the galaxy another fleet began to move. This one was not like the first. It was larger, faster, newer, with ships built in secret shipyards, and weapons forged with one goal: to prove that the humans had only gotten lucky. The Varnak had been embarrassed. They had lost their pride, their name, their power in a single second. And now they wanted revenge, not peace, not talk, only revenge. They said the first loss was a mistake, and the railgun was a trick, and the Titan was just one ship, and they would show the stars that Earth was still nothing but a fading world with a loud voice. And so they came. The second fleet numbered over 50 ships, heavy cruisers, armored carriers, even a dreadnought wrapped in black steel that had never seen combat before. They crossed the neutral zones with shields hot, and engines burning, every movement silent, but deadly, every signal dark. And cold they came, not with warnings, but with weapons. Back on Earth the sensors picked them up late, and the alarms were silent for a moment as the codes were read again and again to make sure they were real and not ghosts. But they were real, and they were heading for Titan. Captain Mara was not surprised. She had waited for this since the moment the first shot was fired, and she had prepared her crew every day since. The Titan was not new and not strong and not fast, but it had something more. It had the railgun, and it had belief. Mara walked the halls of the ship like a ghost, her voice calm, her eyes sharper than any blade. She spoke to each crew member one by one, not as a captain, but as a friend, a leader, a final voice in the storm. She told them the truth. This might be the last day, but it would not be a day forgotten. Dr. Lena Voss had already made adjustments to the weapon, tuning the chamber, balancing the coils, checking the rods, her mind working like lightning, her hands steady like stone. She knew the enemy would not stop until they were turned to ash or victory, and she planned for only one of those. The fleet arrived near the edge of Sector 9 and formed a wall across the stars, each ship locking weapons, each engine pulsing with rage. The Titan sat alone like a wolf in a field of lions. But it was no prey. It was a hunter with its claws hidden. The first message from the enemy came not as words, but as data. Their weapons charged, their fighters launched, their aim clear and final. Mara gave no reply. She looked at the screen and said only one word: now. The chamber lit up with blue fire. The coils spun like angry gods. The energy climbed past safety, past logic, past everything that made sense. And the railgun fired. The rod moved through space like a screen made of metal and memory, and it struck the lead cruiser through the center spine, cutting it in half before it could even fire once. A wave of silence hit the enemy fleet for a breathless second, then chaos broke loose. The second ship moved in a fast arc, but it was too slow. The second shot from the Titan caught its engines and turned it into drifting sparks across the void. Now they knew. It was not luck. It was not a trick. It was power. The enemy fleet broke formation. Some tried to flank, some tried to run, some just opened fire in every direction, hoping to hit something, anything. But the Titan moved like a shadow, dodging, weaving, using space itself as a shield. Lena managed the recharge with her team, each step planned, each movement perfect. Her voice never rose, but every order was heard like thunder. Mara stood on the bridge, calm as the stars. She gave orders like poetry, sharp and smooth, and every crew member followed without fear, because fear had already passed. Now there was only fire. 3 more shots followed, and 3 more ships fell, and now the enemy dreadnought turned its full power toward the Titan, its weapons glowing with light that could melt moons. It fired a blast so wide it lit the sky, and missed, because the Titan was no longer a ship, it was a message, and that message moved like a ghost. The railgun fired once more, and this time it hit the dreadnought not in the center, but near its weapon core, and the explosion that followed was not seen, it was felt. Across space, across stations, across worlds. The second fleet did not stay. They ran. What was left of them turned and vanished into the dark, leaving only wreckage and silence behind. And the Titan remained, not untouched but undefeated. On Earth the news spread faster than light. Not just that they had survived, but that they had won again against more ships, more power, more hate. The stars now watched not with doubt, but with something deeper than fear. Respect. Captain Mara sat in her chair, not smiling, not cheering, only breathing slowly, her eyes on the railgun and the stars beyond. Lena closed her toolkit and leaned back against the wall. Her fingers burned her face, tired, her heart full. They had done it again. Not because of magic or luck or secrets, but because they believed in something stronger than fear. The railgun was still warm, the ship still shipped, the crew still buzzed with the edge of battle. But it was over. For now. Across the galaxy the message was clear. Do not test Earth. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not forget the second strike. Because the first one changed the game. But the second proved the rules had been rewritten. And this time, humans were the ones holding the pen. The stars no longer looked the same from Earth, because something had changed, not in the sky, but in the minds of those who watched it now with new eyes and deeper breath, as if seeing a truth they had never dared to believe. Humanity had not just survived, it had been heard across every system, every empire, every moon and station. The name of Earth now echoed, not in shame or mockery, but in warning, in respect, in fear. They had not asked for war, they had not chased glory, they had not claimed dominion, but the galaxy had given them all three in the shape of fire and silence, and now they stood at the center of something greater than survival. They stood at the edge of legend. After the second strike, no one moved against Earth, no fleet, no probe, no whisper of threat, only messages cloaked and cautious, each one seeking understanding, peace, trade, knowledge, anything but conflict. Leaders who once dismissed humans now asked for meetings, through envoys with careful words and open hands, their tones filled with diplomacy, but their eyes filled with concern. And Earth did not shout, it did not boast, it did not fire again. It listened. Captain Mara returned with the Titan to Earth, not to cheers or songs, but to quiet salutes and long stares. People stepped aside when she walked by, not in fear, but in awe, because she was no longer just a captain, she was a symbol. She had become the one who fired the first answer. Dr. Lena Voss disappeared from public view almost at once, leaving no press, no records, no trail. Some said she had returned to her lab, others said she left for the stars, others whispered she had erased the final blueprints so they could never be used again. But one thing was clear, the weapon she built had done more than tear through ships. It had torn open the fabric of power across the stars and let a new light in. On the moon colonies, people built new schools to teach not just science, but they taught that strength came not just from steel, but from purpose and from unity born in fire. Old nations united, their banners lowered, their borders, their weapons pointed outward, no longer at each other, because now they had seen what they could become if they stood as one. And what they could become was something the galaxy had never prepared for. In the far systems, alien empires rewrote their policies, maps were redrawn with new labels over Earth space. The words ranged from caution to warning to do not engage. Spies who once watched Earth were called back, replaced with ambassadors, who now came with gifts and questions, and hoping to learn, hoping to not be left behind. The Galactic Union met in secret halls, their leaders pale, their votes split, their nerves on edge, because the truth was clear, the balance was broken, and Earth had done it with one ship and one weapon and one voice. And if they could do that with desperation, what could they do with time? What could they become if allowed to grow? They feared the answer, but they also wanted to be part of it, because fear is a powerful thing, but so is the need to belong to something stronger. So they came, one by one. Worlds that had ignored Earth for centuries now opened their gates, asking to trade, asking to share, asking to learn. And behind every offer was the quiet question, will you build more, will you fire again, will you lead? And Earth said only this: we seek peace, but we will not kneel. And that answer was enough, because it was true. Back on the Titan, the crew went home one by one, carrying memories that would never leave them, the soundless shot, the blinking stars, the quiet hum of victory without celebration. They had not fought for glory, they had fought because no one else would, and now the stars would remember them not as heroes, not as monsters, but as the line that changed direction. Captain Mara was offered rank and title and fame, she refused them all, choosing instead to walk unknown among her people, her name spoken in stories, not ceremonies, her path her own. She once said to a child who asked what it felt like to fire the railgun, it felt like being the voice of the voiceless. and that child would grow up to lead the first human mission to the inner Union worlds where no human had ever walked before, and where now they were invited as equals. The railgun was not fired again. It remained quiet in the heart of the Titan, covered in dust and sealed behind steel, not forgotten, but honored, not feared, but remembered. Its power had spoken once, and that was enough. Because true power does not shout, it speaks once, and is heard forever. And so Earth stood, not alone, not above, not beneath, but among. A new voice in the song of stars, a new hand on the wheel of the future. Some still feared them, some still doubted them, but none could ignore them. And that was all humanity had ever asked for. To be seen, to be heard, to be counted. Now they were. Not because they had conquered, but because they had dared. They had stood when they were told to kneel. They had spoken when silence was demanded. They had fired when peace was no longer an option. And now, the stars knew their name. Earth, home of fire, home of hope, home of the rail.